We're again happy to present David McNaughton to talk to us about strategies for transition.
Thank you very much.
Please.
I'm very pleased to have the chance to talk to you today about strategies to support transition from the teenage years, adolescence, to adult life. I've been fortunate to come to Sweden 5 times and very much enjoy the opportunity to be here. The second time we were here, my youngest children were 3.5 years old, and now they're going into their first year of college. They're up here actually. Now they're going into their first year of college. So we've had some transitions of our own over the past few years, and it's been interesting to think about. What I'd like to do today is talk to you about 4 major goals for transition. These are the things we hope for teenagers with severe disabilities. These are the same things I hope for my children, for the children you work with, that they have a safe and supportive place to live, that they participate in meaningful activities, that they have access to needed services, whether those are medical services or employment services, and that they have an opportunity to develop friendships and intimate relationships. I see some of you taking notes. I've been told these are on the website, these overheads.
It's going to be on DART's.
On the DART website. The overheads are all there. I'll be honest, I think last night I probably moved some around a little bit, but everything you see here will be on the DART website. These goals are based on the transition literature generally. I've also been working on a project with Pamela Kennedy, who's a young woman with cerebral palsy. She lives with her husband in North Dakota. She works for Penn State University in a sense, but the two of us have sort of been talking about how can we think about these 4 goals for adults with severe disabilities. The other thing I wanted to mention as we go through, I've developed a web page that has links to a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So as I talk today, I'll be talking about internet resources, I'll be talking about webcasts, I'll be talking about movies on YouTube. Every time you see, there we go, yes. Oh. Too many buttons.
Yeah.
There we go. Every time you see this on a page, that means that from this home page on the aac.psu.edu website, there's a link to the resource that I'm talking about. So I'll try to point that out as we go along. Okay. So part of my thinking on transition is driven by a book by a man named, a psychologist named Daniel Gilbert, who wrote a book called Stumbling on Happiness. And he says what's very interesting about people is that we try and act in ways that prepare us for the future. So we do things that aren't really pleasant now. We save money, we try and diet, we try and exercise, not because we really enjoy it now, but because we think it'll make us happier in the future. But it's interesting because we're really very bad at predicting the future. Think about when you were age 15, did you have any sense of what you'd be doing now? Even at age 25, did you have any sense of what you'd be doing now? So we want to get ready for the future, but we're really bad at predicting exactly what the future will be. I apologize that this is the average American. I tried to look up the average Swede and I couldn't find the statistics. I know they say the Swedes are happier than the Americans, so I don't know what the relationship is. But we know about Americans, we know they're going to have a lot of change in their lives. They're going to move more than 6 times. They're going to change jobs more than 10 times. And I see this a lot working at a university. They change their college major more than 3 times, often while they're at college. So even during those 4 years when you think people will really have a good idea of what they want to do, they're still making an awful lot of changes. So we have this challenge that we need to plan for the future. We need to plan for the future, but we're not really sure what the future will be. And one way to think about it is, one way of planning for the future is in a sense to try and visit the future. Gibson wrote, "The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed," which is an interesting thing to think about. What he argues is that the future we will live is already around us in some way, and so we have an opportunity to visit it today. So for example, if you think about what is your cell phone going to look like in 3 years? What will you be doing with your cell phone in 3 years? I would say ask a teenager, because probably a teenager is already doing what you're going to be doing in 3 years. So the idea is you try and think about, what might I be doing in 3, 5, 10 years? Can I talk with those people now and get a sense of what my future will be? So if we want to visit the future, in a sense, we should talk to somebody who already is living that future. So what I'm going to do with our time today is, in a sense, try and talk about what we can learn from the future. And we're going to be talking about a lot of people who use augmentative and alternative communication and who are adults. And we're going to talk about what happened in their teenage years that influenced how they lived as adults. So we're going to talk about what happened with Beth Ann Luciani while she was a high school student that helped her attend college and graduate with a degree in creative writing. What happened with Chris Klein as a young boy with cerebral palsy that helped him grow up and become somebody that presented at Isaac in Barcelona. He's also now a church minister. He also operates a mentoring service for teenagers who use augmentative communication. What happened with Michael Williams, and this is a very old photograph, as a young boy that helped Michael Williams become somebody who would graduate from college with a degree in library science. And what happened with Rebecca Biani, and she's an individual that has very severe cognitive and physical disabilities. What happened with her as a young girl with very severe cognitive and physical disabilities that helped her grow up to become somebody who would have a very, very rich community of support where she lives. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go one at a time through the different goals and think about what that has meant for the different people that I've spoken about. And the first one we're going to talk about is having a safe and supportive place to live. Where people live has changed a lot in America, and my understanding that things have changed quite a bit in Sweden as well. There's a lot of information here, but the important things to look at are, if we look at the gray bars, that's the number of people that are getting residential services of some kind. So that's the number of people that the government is helping with living supports. But it's this black line that's really the interesting one. That's the percentage of people who get services who are living in community settings. So what we've seen in America since 1977, there were only about 15% of people getting services who were living in the community. Most people were living in institutions. What we've seen over the past 30 years is that's gone from 15% to over 80%. My guess would be that's probably close to 95% right now. In America, the huge push is to close all institutions. Just about everyone is moving to either a community group home or is pushing strongly for supports to live in their own apartment. I can't argue that's been an easy change. I can't argue that there's been parts of that are probably concerning, but the vast majority of people now either live in a community group home or are seeking to live in their own apartment. And that presents special challenges. Michael Williams wrote this: "It was the best of highs, it was the worst of terrors. I was elated, I was depressed. I smiled with joy, I cried with sorrow. I knew everything, I knew nothing. What caused these swings of emotion? Moving out on my own." I'm going to show a little video clip of a presentation that Michael Williams gave. And again, there's this little sign here, which means that if you want to see his whole video, go to that page that I mentioned at the beginning, and you can see his whole presentation. So again, this is Michael Williams, somebody who graduated with his master's degree in library sciences from Stanford University. So did extremely well at college. Listen to what happened when he went to find his first apartment. Oops.
I also think it would be nice to live near a large university. I had no idea that Berkeley is also the hub of the massive political and social movement that will radically alter my life. I never think much about disability. I had spent the first 30 years of my life stumbling around, pretending I was passing as a normal person. I see no reason to change my attitude about it. My Berkeley apartment is great. It has a bedroom, a huge kitchen with a pantry, big wood paneled dining room, and a large living room with a bay window facing the street. Oh, did I mention this apartment is up a flight upstairs?
Okay. So you think of somebody with all the world knowledge of Michael Williams at age 30, still his first apartment, got an apartment on the second floor, right? Didn't put it all, struggled to put that all together. So, there are mistakes that people are going to make as they go out to live independently, but we need to also recognize their right to make mistakes, to make their own decisions in pursuit of their goals. One of the things that Barbara Collier has written a lot about is the importance of helping people be ready to work with personal care attendants once they do move out to the community. And she writes, no matter where someone lives, the quality of life depends to a great extent on the degree to which they can direct the services of the person who provides attendant care. In directing the care, giving positive and constructive feedback, dealing with conflicts and dangerous situations. And she doesn't actually say it there, but you think about how everything that she's talking about there has to deal with communication. John Foyt, a young man who is currently getting his master's degree at the University of Wisconsin, wrote, the three things you need to have a good relationship with your workers are communication, communication, and communication. So a good topic for this conference. I should say now, too, if you have any questions as we go along, please stop and ask them right then and there, because I think it'll help me, know if I'm using words that aren't translating well, and it'll help me know, when I need to slow down, what I need to do. So please ask questions as we go along. So clearly communication is extremely important for adults living in the community, talking to their personal care workers. And the way Barbara Collier has approached this is to document the service routines. So to look at the things that she knows are going to go on in that individual's life, transferring from bed to a wheelchair, transferring from wheelchair to a bathtub, meal times, toileting, and to document those service routines step by step. She creates binders, she puts pages on the wall, and she has the people she works with practice using those in role play situations so they'll be ready when it's time to work with a personal care attendant. I don't know what things are like here, but in America, the people that provide services in group homes, the jobs don't pay a lot of money. People tend to turn over a lot, so you're always having to re-explain how you would like things to be done. This is an example of the level of detail that she does. So the person with a disability over time helps Barbara get this all written out. So when cutting or cleaning my nails, it's important to know that my hand may clench. This is due to my spasticity. It does not help to ask me to relax or to open my hand. I cannot control it. The best thing to do is to gently pry open each finger, hold each nail firmly when cutting or cleaning the nail, cut the nails short, and file any jagged nails because I might scratch myself. Okay? What do you think this does for the person who uses AAC? What does this do for the person who uses AAC?
To write it down, you mean?
Yes. A lot. Because it gives them a lot more predictability in their life. They can be much more confident that the person providing care has this basic information. How do you think this makes the care worker feel? much more confident. And I think that's such an interesting word because you're dealing with adults with cerebral palsy. There's going to be a lot of movements. It could almost be a little scary if this is your first time working with somebody. So now you have a much better sense of how does this person, want their services provided. And the person went on to write in describing this project, I spent a year writing up my service plans for different situations. So this is not a fast thing. It took time. I put them in a binder. I have instructions on how I want people to talk to me, how I can communicate with them, and what I want done every morning. This is one of the best things I've ever done. It's made a major difference when I went to camp where people don't know me. I wish I had done it when I was younger. Interesting thing. Do you think parents already know this information? I see some yeses and some nos, and you're both right. When the people went and wrote this out, often it was things that parents already knew, but then sometimes parents read it and said, I never knew the soap got in your eyes when I washed your hair. I never knew you didn't like your pants put on like that. So sometimes, even with people that know these people very, very well, there's a few surprises about how they want things done. So it's not enough just to write these things down. What Barbara does with people is have them use role plays to practice these, and also to practice what to do when things go wrong. So if somebody doesn't follow these steps, what should they do? And she almost teaches them a problem-solving strategy that they can use over and over and over. So the first step is always to describe the problem, what's gone wrong, talk about why it's important, and to communicate what needs to happen differently. So those 3 steps of describing the problem, stating the significance, communicate what needs to happen is a strategy they can use over and over and over in lots of different situations whenever there's a problem. And it's interesting to think about, not only does this help with getting your fingernails cut or your hair washed, but this is also going towards what Michael Waymire calls self-determination. So the ability to have an impact in your life. And we tend to think, or at least I tend to think of self-determination as the big decisions. Where am I going to live? What am I going to do? But the ability to make those big decisions is grounded in lots and lots of practice with the small decisions. What's for lunch? What am I going to wear? Those sorts of things. And I think sometimes in our busy lives and in trying to provide services, we take away a lot of these opportunities, and we expect people to be ready for these opportunities, but you need a lot of practice with this before you can be ready for this. Really nice example from Randy Horton, who's an adult with cerebral palsy. He learned to read at the age of 40, and once he'd learned to read, he became much more active as a communicator. And this is Randy describing what he does when he goes on the transportation for people in wheelchairs and they don't buckle him in properly. So I tell the driver politely at first what needs to be done. If he doesn't pay attention, I say, company rules say that's your responsibility. Then if there's still no compliance, I say, you need to call your supervisor, followed by, all right, I'll call him myself. And please send a supervisor if the driver refuses to tie down the chair. So again, just a really nice example of how he's feeling much more in control of his own life and that he has the right to tell people this is how things need to be done, and if they're not, here's what's going to happen. And I think it's important that we try and think about ways to support people in doing these kinds of things, in speaking up for themselves and saying how things need to be done. Because sadly, and again, I only have American statistics, but I suspect there's similar things all over the world in terms of crime and abuse for the people that we work with. A survey by Diane Bryan and colleagues, they looked at 40 adults who use AAC. Almost half of them had experienced crime or abuse. This is a really scary one. Almost all of them knew the person that was perpetrating the crime and abuse. 70% victimized multiple times. Barely a quarter had reported it to police. Okay? So again, probably a really strong relationship between this and this. Very difficult to report people that you know that are committing crimes against you, but when you don't, it just goes on and on and on. When we talk to people who use AAC about, what are some of the problems behind that, and this is Sarah Lever, a young woman who uses AAC, and she wrote, "Sometimes even when we want to speak out, we don't have the right words to do so. Most communication aids don't come with the vocabulary that we need to end the silence about crime and abuse. We need adequate vocabulary to talk about crime and abuse, and we need to know how to use that vocabulary." So I see some people nodding very enthusiastically. In terms of adding the vocabulary, Diane Bryan's done some very nice work on what are the words that you need to talk about crime and abuse, and there's a link to those lists on the page that I mentioned. But I think it's that second part. We need to learn how to use that vocabulary that's so important. There's all sorts of speaking children that suffer crime and abuse and don't feel they have anyone they can talk to report that. And I think it's even more challenging for this population because the people in their social network is so much smaller. So it's those two things, having the vocabulary, but having a large enough social circle that there's people you can talk to, people you can trust about what's going on in your life.
That's one of the negative sides of all the speaking of AAC devices, that they lack the vocabulary. That's really important for people. And you can order bread and you can do
Right.
things like that, but you cannot say that people are abusing you.
Well, I'm old enough to remember the very early days of speech synthesizers, and of course the first thing kids want to do when they get a new device is sort of type in the words they shouldn't type in a sense, all the time to have some fun with swearing and that sort of thing, and the devices wouldn't even speak them. Like they've been programmed to not even say the word, even if the child could spell. So you're right, we've been very slow to sort of realize kids need access to that vocabulary, then they need to learn how and when it's appropriate to use those words.
And also age-appropriate phrases, that
Yeah.
what you say when you're a teen.
Yeah.
Normally.
Yeah. No, I think, as I say, Diane Bryan's tried to think a lot about what do we need for crime and abuse, what do we need for sexuality, what do we need for employment, all those different vocabulary sets. So.
Like
And so,
phrases like this.
that's international. Yeah, good.
Yeah, but you don't find them on AAC.
So again, some things to learn about, encouraging them to communicate what they want and how they want it done, starting to develop those self-determination skills so that when things are problematic, they've got the skills they need to communicate that effectively. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how to have a safe and supportive place to live and some of the things you can do when things are going wrong. I'd like to talk a little bit about participating in meaningful activities. And there's a range of things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about work, volunteering, post-secondary education, and recreation and leisure. So the nice things about employment, everyone thinks first of sort of financial support. It's nice to have the money. But when we talk to people who use AAC, as important as the money, sometimes more important, is the opportunity to interact socially, to have a chance to talk and to be with people, and also enhance self-esteem, the opportunity to contribute to society. We worked with one person that said, "I cried when I first paid taxes." Okay? So it's sort of the opposite of us. I think here we sort of think, wow, all that money. And he cried because he was so proud that it was the first time in his life that he felt he was giving back to society. Three things we think about when we think about employment, and I'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about this afternoon. But first, that we develop in the employee the knowledge and the social skills that are valued in the workplace. So we need to work with the individual to develop those skills. Second, we need to find a job that's a good match for the skills and interest of the person who uses AAC. And finally, to make sure that the supports that we need are available to maintain employment success. So we're going to talk a little bit about that first one, developing employee knowledge and skills that are valued in the workplace. And for this, sometimes Anthony Arnold, who is a young man in North Dakota, uses augmentative communication, works for an AAC company. Sometimes he presents with me, but we sort of have him virtually today. So,
I'm Anthony Arnold, an augmentative and alternative communicator from Grand Forks, North Dakota.
This is his programmed presentation that he wrote.
I'm a remote troubleshooter for the Pratt Roaming Company, and I also do a lot of the beta testing on their newer communication devices, such as the new Echo 2. Working for companies such as the Pratt Roaming Company is a great goal to have in mind, but it did take years of preparation to get to this point. I'd like to believe my transition to adulthood, independent living, and employment started to happen on the day my parents learned of my diagnosis of cerebral palsy, because the longer you put off the educational end, rehabilitation, the less likely it is that you will achieve the goals you want. After my parents learned about my cerebral palsy, they...
Sorry, that's the next one. I just wanted to stop there because I find it so interesting that the story they tell in his family is as soon as we learned you had cerebral palsy, we started working on how are we going to make things better. So just what are the stories we tell as a family? And theirs is very much, you know, you don't sit there and sort of say, feeling sorry for myself in a sense. It's as soon as you learn there's a problem, you get to work. So I just find that interesting. This is his very first communication board.
After my parents learned about my cerebral palsy, they started taking me to therapies and a preschool program. One of the first developments was the creation of a communication board with 6 symbols. Communication is a very important element for employment and independent living, so you want to start laying the groundwork as early as possible, or again you will witness fewer results, and the result will not be the one that you want.
So again, from the very beginning, there was an expectation that he would communicate, and interesting, not only that he would communicate, but that he would learn to read as well.
In elementary school, I was fortunate to have a resource room teacher who was determined to teach me how to read come hell or high water.
Does that translate?
I must say that reading is a necessary skill to attain if you're hoping to obtain employment someday. I can't name a job where they don't require basic reading skills. During elementary school good, they also taught me how to spell and write, which is a skill I had to use every day at the Pratt Roaming Company.
So I don't know if MinSpeak is big or sort of around a little bit in Sweden.
Not so much.
Little bit. So it's a way of sort of, just having a few keystrokes and having a whole word or a whole phrase come out. So for people that get really good at it, it can be a very fast way to communicate. He's the fastest, one of the fastest people I've ever met on using MinSpeak to speak very, very quickly with these things. But I just find it interesting, as good as he is, how important he thinks literacy, being able to read and write, has been to him in his career. So again, I'll be talking more about developing employee knowledge and skills this afternoon. We've got our website talking about literacy that Janice has mentioned. I'm going to keep moving on and talk about developing jobs that are a good match for the skills and interests of the AAC user. So clearly when we have somebody that can read and write as well as Anthony Arnold does, we've got a certain number of jobs we can look at. But it's interesting to look at what jobs there are for people that maybe don't have those reading and spelling skills. So I'm going to show you a video of a young woman named Haley. She's in her mid-20s, and her job is going out and collecting lunch orders from people in the community. Then she takes them back to a restaurant. The restaurant gives her the food, and then she delivers the food to the people in their offices. So this is a short video clip of her picking up an order. The camera is sort of following her shoulder, so it's a little jerky, but hopefully you'll get the idea of what's going on. That's Haley in the blue.
I helped in the business factory in church on Monday. Would you like to order lunch from Calverman's House of Pizza? What are you having for lunch?
So work is not just about the money. She didn't make a sale there. Work is about having the opportunity to have these social interactions. So again, part of it is, what you've seen there is identifying and developing jobs that are a good match for the skills and interests of the AAC user. For Haley, it's those brief little social interactions. That's why she gets out of bed each day, because she just loves those opportunities to have those little back and forths and then to be with people. And again, I'll talk more about her this afternoon. And finally, the third part of employment is making sure the needed supports are there to maintain employment success. So a large part of what's going on with Haley is that she's got a mother that's really fought to make that happen, and she gets supports from the vocational rehabilitation, that's sort of the same one, hopefully, the vocational rehabilitation people in her community. She gets 10 hours a week where somebody goes around with her in this job. Again, there's 2 webcasts on employment that are at the website if you're interested. The full story of Anthony Arnold and the full story of David Chappell, another individual, and those are both at the website. So I talked a little bit about employment. We're going to talk a little bit about volunteer activities. And the nice thing about volunteer activities, it's pretty much the same as employment, except you don't get the money. You've got an opportunity to interact socially, and you have the enhanced self-esteem of contributing to society. And the example I wanted to talk about here is Rebecca B&E. 22 years ago, I worked in Toronto. And in Toronto, one of the children at that school was Rebecca. She was 4.5 years old at that time. And to be absolutely honest, she probably had the most severe disabilities of any child that was at that school. When she was assessed, people would say all she does is stare at the lights and sort of blink at the lights. No response to mother's face, no response to mother's voice. People were extremely pessimistic about what the outcomes would be for her. But her mother and some of the staff worked on, how do we build a community of support for this person that's going to have very severe needs for her entire life? And I really have to give most of the credit, to be honest, to the mother in this situation, because she has just built this whole community of support around Rebecca. She's a member of a dance troupe that has performed internationally, actually performed for the Pope. And you'll see a little video clip of that. She volunteers as a listener in an elementary school classroom. So you know how sometimes at schools they have the kids in grade 5 will come down and read to the kids in grade 1? Well, she goes in and she's a listener. So the kids in grade 3 read to her. And she smiles and she laughs and she sort of enjoys that she's with somebody, but she's a listener. Helps as a guide. So when they do tours at the local museum, Rebecca goes along, and the tour guides say that people start to look at what Rebecca is looking at, and that people actually pay more attention on the tour because they're watching her trying to figure out, well, why is Rebecca interested in what's back there? Why is Rebecca interested in what's over there? So again, I would never have thought of most of these things. I have to give most of the credit to the mother. But think about how she's just made a very active life for this individual, and think of the community of support that's really grown for Rebecca. So the mother, again, there's a website there that's got some very good information on her, and she made a short movie just so you can get a sense of Rebecca's, where she's at.
And Rebecca just brings a whole different story and a whole different way of thinking.
it's true. So again, the mother has just looked at ways to get her involved with as many people as possible, just thinking there's going to be a day when the mother's no longer there, and the quality of Rebecca's life is going to depend on how big her community of support is. So just trying to get everything she can do to build that. We'll talk for a moment about Beth Ann Luciani. She's a young woman. She actually just graduated last spring from a four-year university with a degree in creative writing. She did attend a self-contained high school for students with severe disabilities, so she made a choice, her family made a choice, that she would not be included in a general education classroom through high school, that she would attend a self-contained school all the way through grade 12. That's probably becoming less common in America. There's a huge push that everybody get services in general education classrooms. I think the good things for Beth Ann about being in a self-contained classroom was that her teachers and the people who worked with her there really understood her physical access needs. So she uses a scanning system to communicate. So you'll see her hitting a head switch to operate her device. Probably the downside of her being in a self-contained school was that sometimes the academic standards weren't as high as they would have been in a general education classroom. So when she got to college and university, she found the math incredibly difficult for her. In fact, the school really needed to, look differently at some things in order for her to get her degree. Her reading and writing was always very strong. Her math was always extremely weak, and they never really, in a college setting, managed to bring that up. So they just concentrated on her reading and writing skills, and she got a degree in creative writing. I'm going to show a short video clip of Beth Ann in a classroom, a university classroom. And what the teacher would do is tell Beth Ann some of the questions the night before. So the teacher would tell Beth Ann, we're going to be talking about chapter 4, and I'm going to ask these 3 questions. When I ask these 3 questions, that's a chance for you to respond. So Beth Ann would prepare her answers ahead of time so that when the teacher asked that question, Beth Ann was ready to answer.
She found strength. At first, she did not see herself as someone who could survive this event. But in time, she began to look around at what she had as big skills, and she saw herself as someone Yes.
She stood up for herself and became bolder.
Yes. She stood up for herself against people who were rather unkind to her.
Okay. Beth Ann loved college. She really paced herself, so rather than taking 5 classes in a semester, she took 1 or 2, so that she didn't have more homework than she could deal with. So it's taken her 10 or 12 years to get her degree rather than 3 or 4. So it's taken her a lot longer, but she's really enjoyed it. She's enjoyed the coursework, the academics, very, very much. She's not enjoyed the social so much. She says she really doesn't have a very good relationship with the other students in her class. And it's interesting to think about why. If you ask Beth Ann, she says it's because she's so much older than the other students. So she's in her early 30s now. The other kids in the class are 18 or 19. And there's a big gap between what 18 and 19-year-olds are doing in their first years of college, at least in America, and what people in their young 30s are starting to think about. The other thing that's going on, though, is from the very beginning, Beth Ann's had a lot of trouble getting personal care attendants in college that are reliable. So even though the university is supposed to help with note takers and supposed to help with people that'll get her from class to class, it's never been reliable enough for her. So her mother is the person that's come in and provided supports the whole way through. So this shows how old I'm getting, because when I showed this to some students at Penn State and we were talking about this, well, they said, of course no one's talking to Beth Ann in the classroom. She's sitting there with her mother, you know. So how are you going to talk about what's going on a Friday night or a Saturday night when the mother's sitting there? So, as I said, I'm getting too old. So little bits and pieces of this are sort of coming together, but clearly we've still got to figure out ways that people can have age-appropriate supports in the university classroom if we're expecting them to have the same kind of peer interactions as everybody else. So again, for this to be successful for Beth Ann, it's taken a huge amount of organization for her, so she has to think very carefully about, you know, where buildings are located and how to do her classes and how to schedule everything. And to be 100% honest, I don't think this would be happening if she didn't have the level of support that she receives from her family in terms of making this all work out. Questions at this stage? I should probably stop formally. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I just wonder, we are doing a lot of, or not a lot of, but sometimes we are doing adaptation for the academic part in schools. But actually, I think we forget doing adaptations about social interactions and so on. We think it's going natural, so, but it doesn't.
No, and I think that's really such a huge challenge. Some of the things that they're trying to look at in America is how do we build the social and the work together? So how do we create classroom activities where people need to work together as part of a team in order to get the desired academic results? But it's not just a case of throwing people together in a group and saying, make it work. I know with my students, when I say there's going to be a group project, they groan. You know, because they're so scared of, I'm going to be the one doing all the work and somebody else isn't going to do the work. So it takes a lot of planning and a lot of preparation to make those teams work. But at least the research in America is, if we're really expecting people to work together, so, you know, the rich kids and the poor kids, or the kids that speak English well and kids that have English as a second language, if we're really expecting them to become friends and to work together, we have to design school activities in which they need to work together. Because if we just think, oh, they're going to sit in the classroom and then they're going to go to the cafeteria and everybody's going to get together, that doesn't happen. Everybody stays in their own, you know, everybody sticks to their own groups, and it has to start in the classroom. But I can't say it's easy. But I think that's where we need to go. Thank you. Other questions or thoughts? Robert Slavin, I don't know if his research has come over here, is doing just some really interesting work in how do we create classroom situations where people work together and feel good about working together, and he's got some really interesting ideas in that. Robert Slavin. Okay, so we've talked about work, we've talked about volunteering, but clearly that's not all there is to life. We need to think about recreation and leisure. So some of the reasons we think about recreation and leisure, a chance to build friendships, do activities that build self-confidence, engage in self-expression. And again, I think this is often something that gets left out of a school curriculum, but you think about how much of your time as an adult is really spent in things that we hope would support recreation and leisure. I'm just going to be talking about this a little bit, but again, there's some links on the website if you'd like to look at this more. As Rebecca mentioned in the video, she's an artist and she actually does art shows of her paintings. Another young woman you can learn about at the website is Ann Abbott. Ann Abbott is a painter. This is a portrait of her husband. And what she does is make paintings, and then every Saturday she goes and sells them at the local market. And so that's her way to both make a little bit of money, also to get out and meet people on a regular basis. This is kind of an interesting story. When the internet first started, Ann Abbott was one of the first people to go out on discussion boards and start to have conversations back and forth with other people. And so she got on there, but she didn't tell anybody she had a disability. And so she had this conversation with this man for 3, 4, 5 months before she finally revealed that I have a disability. Happily, that didn't make any difference at all in the relationship, and they got married. So anyways, if you'd like to read more about Ann Abbott, you can visit the website and find out more about her. I did want to take this chance to talk a little bit more about some of the literacy work that Janice is doing at Penn State, and talk a little bit about a young man named Ben. Ben has a diagnosis of autism. In the video you're going to see he's 13 years old, has a seizure disorder, some visual impairment, and he's attending a special school for students with autism where he's participating in a life skills class. When he first started the literacy program, he had about 10 picture exchange symbols that he would use to ask for food items. He had a communication device, but the school didn't really think he was using it in a functional way. They thought he was just sort of pushing buttons at random. Had some sign approximations that he would use, some facial expressions. So when Janice was talking yesterday about how sometimes we start literacy instruction with people that are quite a bit older than usual, and with people for whom there's been very little expectation they would learn to read, Ben's a good example of that. So this is Ben with Janice in learning some reading skills, and she's working on sight word vocabulary with him. So as Janice mentioned, sometimes when we're working with older individuals that have not had a history of success, we want them to feel successful as quickly as possible, so we do some sight words that they're interested in. So the word that she's teaching them to read is YouTube. So she's going to show him the word YouTube, and she's going to give him 2 pictures to choose from, spoon and YouTube. So the idea is that he would read the word and then choose the picture that matches the word Janice is going to show him.
Ready? Look, there's a spoon. There's a spoon. Good for you. Give me 5, okay? Can you match it? Where does it go? You're right. You got it. Give me 5. Good job. Good for you. You're reading. You're reading. Wow. Wow. Good job.
Of all Janice's videos, that's my favorite.
You read it.
The look he gives her when she says you're reading, and he just looks at her like, lady, you're out of your mind. You know? So that's my absolute favorite. So again, that's after 4 hours of instruction. Just trying to look at ways that we can make people feel competent as quickly as possible. And then this is him probably after about 40 hours of instruction. So again, we say 40 hours, but you think about that. If somebody got an hour a day in a regular school week, that would be, where are we? End of October. Okay? So 2 months into the school year, that's the progress we should be seeing. And he's 13 years old, and anyways.
Good. I understood that. Good for you. Let's get it. Let's get it.
So I'm sorry, there's a sentence written out. Janice is showing him one word at a time, and as he reads it, he's going to point to pictures to indicate that he's read the word.
Good job, Ernie. 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 Got it? Go. Ernie. Let's see what's next. Good job. Turn up here. Good work. Ernie likes likes the good job. Do you know that one? Yeah? Okay, let me see. Let's see if we've got it. Good job, Brad. Good job. Rubber ducky. Rubber ducky. Let's see him. Oh, there he is. There's Ernie. Likes the rubber ducky. Rubber ducky, you're the one. Rubber ducky is so much fun. Rubber ducky, I'm awesome fond of you. Rubber ducky. Yeah. Good job.
Janice spoke yesterday about the 5 things that are really important in literacy instruction. So, appropriate time, appropriate content, using strategies that we know are going to work. It's that 5th one, building motivation and rapport, that, boy, is really just the most important one, I think, of all 5, and the willingness to sort of start with where the student is. He's 13 years old. Right now, what's most exciting to him is Ernie and Rubber Ducky. And it's not up to us to say, you're wrong, you should be thinking about something like this. If that's what floats his boat, as we say in America at this age, that's what we're going to start with, because he's really working on something very hard here, which is reading, and we're trying to match his interests. Over time, though, what we hope to do is gradually build and expand his interests. And so when we do books with him, we're starting to think about how can we start to introduce new topics. So we started to do books that he could read, introduce different people, introduce different concepts over time. And by learning to read, by learning to spell, that gave him the tools to go and find videos on YouTube. So for his recreation and leisure, he could look for videos on YouTube. He started to spell short stories. What do you think that is? See, the moms say love, mom. The dads sometimes say hello, mom. Anyways, either one's nice. But clearly, has picked up enough spelling skills that he's starting to make those efforts. And texting and emailing are very realistic goals for him. So we tend to think of literacy as something that's mostly a school function. But for him, it's going to be a really important recreation and leisure activity in terms of finding videos, texting people, all those sorts of things. And again, we've got more information about Bren at the literacy website. And there's a link to the website on the page. Okay. I've got half an hour, right?
Yes.
Yep. So third major area of need is maintaining a reliable source of income and access to services. And I think in both the US and Sweden, there's sort of a basic amount of money that's provided for people with severe disabilities. So it's not so much that we have to worry that they're going to starve in a sense, but they really need to learn the skills they'll need to access medical services and to get the best medical services they can. And I think things are maybe the same. We can talk about this. As children in America, the parents coordinate the care. But what's really going to change as adults is the people with disabilities will need to manage their own care, find service providers, and be able to advocate for the services they need. As children, a rehab center often provides one-stop coordinated services. So the team, in a sense, is there for the child. The occupational therapist talks to the speech-language pathologist. Everybody sort of works together. As an adult, at least in America, that's all gone. It's up to the person with a disability to make sure that the occupational therapist has talked to the speech-language pathologist, has talked to the person that organizes the wheelchairs, that all those people are communicating. And finally, in America at least, the government guarantees health and rehabilitation services. While children are in school, there's relatively good services, And parents that are willing to really fight, there's laws that they can use to sort of go to court and say, I expect this for my child. As an adult in America, that pretty much disappears. You get a basic amount of money, but it's up to you to go out and fight for those things that you believe you need. So just as an example, in America, every child is guaranteed, in a sense, an augmentative communication device. If you can show the school that my child needs AAC in order to participate in a classroom, it's up to the school to provide that AAC device. Once you're an adult, you have to prove that you need an AAC device to do your job. And that's a very different argument, and that's a much tougher argument. So we have got reasonably good funding for children in AAC. We have very difficult funding for adults in AAC. So what is it that children, as they become adults, will face with doctors? How long do you think the typical medical appointment is? Oh boy, you're faster than us. In America, we say 20 minutes, but I think most of that's sitting by yourself in the room waiting for the doctor to come. No? That's how it feels. The time to talk before a patient is interrupted. So when they do studies of the doctor says, "Why are you here?" How long does the person get to talk before the doctor interrupts? 20 seconds. Okay? So you've got to have a pretty good sense of what you want to say. And when you think about somebody who's using augmentative communication, how much is going to get out in 20 seconds unless they're really prepared? And there's often a real mismatch between what doctors are expecting, which is that we're really going to make things happen here, and then the person who uses AAC, sometimes their perspective is, this is my chance to really let them know all the things that are going wrong. So we really need to work with people who use AAC to get them prepared for the doctors, and we need to work with the doctors. There's got to be a middle ground, I hope, there. So what Subalandan has been working on is what are the skills that people who use AAC need in order to have successful interactions with the doctors. So first, to introduce themselves and their system, to have the vocabulary they need to be able to talk about their problems, and to have appropriate communication strategies to make sure their concerns are understood. So having the skills to tell the doctor, stop, I haven't finished explaining, or having the skills to realize maybe I should write out the problems beforehand and turn them over so that the talking time can be reserved for questions back and forth, not the explaining of the problem. There's been some good work done on the creation of communication passports. So having somebody write out what are the best ways to communicate with me, how do I indicate yes and no, what are some of the things I want you to remember, and some of this might be kind of small for you. So, things to know when communicating with me. Talk to me like an adult. You don't need to speak loudly, slowly, or in a condescending manner. I may bring somebody with me who will act as a facilitator and speak on my behalf. So sometimes people who use AAC want to bring a family member and just basically have that family member do all the interacting with the doctor. Remember, I can make my own decisions. I need you to respect my privacy. I need you to keep me informed of everything that's going on. So again, just trying to write out and be more explicit about how this person expects others to communicate with them. There's also been some work done on the creation of health passports. So a little bit like a communication passport, except listing the medical information about somebody. And it's surprising how often adults who use AAC don't know any of this information. So someone else has always been the person to tell the doctor. Someone else has always looked after all of this. And you think about what happens when that other person is no longer there. I had an opportunity to write a book about transition for people who use AAC. And I think the saddest thing I found in sort of gathering material was a study they did in Australia. And the number of parents of children with severe disabilities who said, I hope my child dies before I do, because they were so worried about what would happen to their child when they were gone. And I can't think of anything sadder for a parent to say, so it really speaks to the importance of, both for the parent and for the child, preparing them to be able to interact with professionals once the parents are gone. For those of you who are working with children, I think there's some things we can start with at the very early stages, how the AAC should be set up, learning to ask for it and advocate for it, making sure it's been charged, and really encouraging adolescents to take more of a role in learning about the medications, their schedule, and taking more of a leadership role in medical appointments. Okay, so I know we're moving quickly through the 4 areas, but those are just some of the comments about making sure you have the skills you need to advocate for medical services. The last major area we're going to look at is developing friendships and intimate relationships. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that Sarah Blackstone has done on social networks and other areas. And I guess before we talk about this, I think it's just interesting to think about how the second thing we talked about, the meaningful activities lead to friendship opportunities. So when I think about the people that I know that have the richest social network, those are also the people that have most aggressively pursued employment and volunteering opportunities. It's very hard to develop that larger community that larger community of friends if you're not really out in the general public as much as possible. Inclusion is often extremely difficult to manage, but it's really been inclusion that has resulted in the richest social network for these people. So I don't know if you're familiar with some of the work that Sarah Blackstone and Mary Hunt Berg have done in their work on social networks. But what they've done is work to develop materials to help you document what's going on in the lives of people with severe disabilities. Their work is quite similar to something we call Circle of Friends. Is that a concept that's around here in little bits and pieces?
And the social network is translated into Swedish.
Oh, well, wonderful. Good. Okay. Well, thank you. So I think we can almost talk about the two interchangeably to some extent. The nice thing about social network is it really moves on and talks about how is a person communicating in all these different situations. What the Circle of Friends really talks about, though, is how many people does this child know and what is their relationship with people. So the first step in the Circle of Friends process is to sort of map out who does this person know. So in the center is the child and their family. The next circle is their friends. The next circle is casual acquaintanceships. The next circle is paid workers. And the final circle is sort of people they see sometimes but not very often. For people without disabilities, what do you think that circle looks like? People without disabilities.
People in circle 2.
Right. So we see a lot of people in these areas and virtually nobody in circle 4. When we look at people with disabilities, often these areas are quite empty in terms of friends, and we're seeing most of the people with whom they're interacting being paid workers. And so within the Circle of Friends approach, and there's some nice stuff on this on the internet of how people have pursued this, they design this and then they meet with the classroom in a sense. And the really nice thing about children in grades 1 and 2, they are concerned that there's children in their classrooms that don't feel like they have friends. And often children in grade 1 and 2 will be quite eager to volunteer to make sure that somebody goes with that child to a new classroom. Somebody is with that child at recess. At least our experience has been in the younger grades, children are quite caring and want other kids to have friends, to feel like they're a part of things. Middle school is more challenging. And middle school is where we find, when I talked a little bit about children need to work together, and as a teacher, it's almost the teacher's responsibility to make sure that the groups that form in the classroom are made up of lots of different types of kids. That's been the more successful approach for getting kids with disabilities involved with everybody in the middle school years. But in the elementary school years, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, this has been a very positive approach. And this is Rebecca B&E's circle of friends and some of the things she's hoping for in her life. So when you think about, being an artist, a dancer, a reader, a tour guide, a lot of work, and I think this reflects all the work, but it also creates a lot of people that know her and care about her. So, when her parents are no longer around, there are a lot of people that know Rebecca, are concerned about Rebecca, and will work to make sure that things are going about as well as they can. Questions? Okay. I'm going to introduce Chris Klein. I mentioned him right at the very beginning. He's really developed an incredible social network for himself. I've got about a 5-minute video that I'm going to show of him. But basically what he does is he has a personal care attendant that comes in first thing in the morning, gets him out of bed, showered, and he has breakfast. Then for the rest of his day, he depends upon a network of about 24 friends. So through his church, mostly, he has met people who come in and do 1 meal a week with him, or go shopping with him once a week. And he organizes these people through Facebook. So if he finds out that the person he thought was supposed to come for Thursday night dinner had to cancel, he gets on Facebook and says, "Help, I need somebody for Thursday night dinner." That goes out to this network of friends, and somebody volunteers to come in. So I'll show his clip and then we can talk. And this is just part of his movie. Again, if you'd like to see his whole movie, there's a link on the internet.
I do live on my own, but I do need assistance 4 times a day. I need help with my personal care tasks. I need someone to feed me breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I have to have someone get me up and help me shower and get dressed in the morning. These tasks are usually daunting for someone like me. The reality is many people with a disability try to find someone to live with them so that they have someone always available if they need help throughout the day. I'm not a typical person with a disability. I live by myself, and I am able to live by myself because I have developed a great community. In the morning, I do use the home care service. I use the home care service for the morning because it is a little more involved. They have to shower and dress me. It only takes them an hour to do, and by 8:30 they are out the door. I am by myself from 8:30 until noon. When noon comes, a friend comes to give me lunch. I have about 35 friends doing a lunch, dinner, or bedtime once a week. They are here for only an hour, and then the rest of the day I am able to function on my own. My AAC device makes this possible because when I need something, I am able to call a friend to come over. I have friends that live right in my neighborhood, so even in an emergency, I can call a friend, and he or she can get to my house as quick as possible. I believe in building community, and I know that can be difficult for some to do. People that have a communication disability have a really difficult time forming relationships because they have a difficult time getting into a conversation with anyone. So Steve, tell me what you first thought after experiencing communicating with me for the first time.
You know, the very first time that I communicated with you, it was a slow process. I mean, this was many years ago, 15 years ago. And so the early on process was slow, a lot of patience. I wanted to fill in gaps.
He operates that with his toes. I should have mentioned that. It's quite different.
Yes. They have. This is where an AAC system can make a huge difference in a person's life. Yet, we need to educate people about what AAC is. Typically, when someone meets a person that uses AAC, he or she doesn't know how to interact with them. When this happens, the person says hi and walks away. He or she assumes the person couldn't understand them. People need to understand that people that use AAC are well educated. We want to talk to you. We want to build a relationship with you. AAC gives a person the opportunity to have a life. I have been using AAC for over 30 years now, and it has given me a life. It has given me the opportunity to build relationships, and those relationships have developed into a great community. The community I have built has given me the freedom to live on my own.
Okay. So the woman I pointed out was Chris's fiance at the time, and they're now married. So we're starting to just see some outcomes that for individuals with severe disabilities that I would not have anticipated 20 or 30 years ago. The other interesting thing I'll mention there is that Chris, I'll start that over again. I'm originally from Canada. So in terms of what I think about sort of government and politics, I think I'm probably a lot closer to the Swedes in terms of the role of government and a strong government than I am to Americans, who a lot of them believe the best government is no government. Chris Klein would be one of those people that believes the best government is no government, and I think the people with whom are a part of his community would believe that as well. So I guess the only thing I'm trying to say is, as a Canadian looking at America, I just think, this is just crazy. Like, how can people live like this? And all I wanted to share was, sometimes it actually works out. It doesn't always work out, and it's a real problem when it doesn't, but there are communities where people really live up to that belief of, we don't want the government involved, we'll do it ourselves. And there are at least a few people that are truly living those words, not just saying that as an excuse not to pay taxes. So, again, sometimes we see some incredible communities develop where people take that responsibility to do it themselves. Yeah.
How is it now that he's married? Do the friends still do the job, or is it the wife who does everything?
No. You're suspicious. No, I think they've been very careful that they don't want the wife just to become sort of the personal care attendant as much. So I think there's probably fewer people coming in, but there's still a recognition that she needs a life beyond providing those services. So clearly, a large part of my presentation has been the argument that we've got a lot we can learn as speech-language pathologists or teachers from older individuals who use AAC. One of the things we had a chance to look at a number of years back was what happens when we build relationships between older individuals who use AAC and younger individuals who use AAC. So we ran something called the Mentor Project, and our goal with that was to work with 30 adults with cerebral palsy who used AAC. All of the people had to have functional literacy skills, but we were also looking for adults who in some way had achieved a significant goal. So maybe they were working, maybe they were living independently, but doing something where they felt they'd really achieved something. And we wanted people who were interested in talking to the next generation. So we were looking for older adults who used AAC that wanted to talk to younger adults who used AAC. And we did a few things as sort of a training activity for them to get them ready to work with these younger individuals, because our goal was that they would email back and forth between these older individuals and younger individuals and give the younger individuals a chance to learn, in a sense, from these older individuals. So one of the things we taught them was, we call this the laugh strategy. And it was the idea that when someone comes to you with a problem, don't just immediately tell them what you think they should do. Try and get that person to talk a little bit more about the problem. Make sure you really understand the problem before you start popping out with a lot of solutions. We taught this in the mentor project to these older individuals who use AAC. I've also had a lot of fun teaching this to special education teachers and just trying to get them to slow down a little bit when a parent comes with a problem or someone comes with a problem. Don't just say the first thing that pops into your head. Try and catch your breath, ask a few questions, make sure you've really understood it before you start saying, this is what I think you should do. Anyways, that's another story. So the goal was that these older individuals would correspond with these younger individuals on a regular basis, that they would build up a relationship, and then they would help with problem solving and goal setting. And the idea was that this would take place for approximately 1 year. We were able to see all the emails that went back and forth, and it was interesting because an awful lot of went back and forth was social. What are you watching on TV? Did you see the football game last night? Awful lot of social stuff. Some talk about friendships, loneliness, some of the challenges of talking to unfamiliar people, coping with disability. It was interesting as we looked at what the mentors expected and what the younger people expected. I think the mentors at first thought, this is great. I get to act like a professional. Someone's going to come to me with a problem and I'll solve it. And what the younger people wanted was the relationship of just the chit-chat. And what we found was the most successful groups were the ones that spent a lot of time chit-chatting and building, we would say, a bank of trust. So when there was a problem, they knew each other well enough that the mentor and the younger person respected each other and the trust was there to answer the problem. The ones that took more time to develop were the ones where the mentor just said, "What's your problem?" Because the younger person was very reluctant to share in that way. So sometimes we had to get in and coach a little bit. We said it was a bit like computer dating sometimes, that we had to try and help these relationships get going and survive. So anyways, here's an example of a conversation that went back and forth. So this is the younger person writing, and he wrote, "I cannot get any friends. The other kids at school are rude. I don't have any friends at school. They just freak out about my chair. I'm too tired with everybody's reactions. I've given up with my peers." Okay, so probably pretty common. And this was the answer they got back. I'm going to stop talking. Can everybody see? Yeah, it's probably easier if I don't talk. This is the answer they got back. Good. And here's the part we were happy to see. sort of questions and advice mixed together there a little bit. But I thought some very, sensible suggestions based on the experience of somebody who'd been through all of it and thought about, what they want someone to know. Okay, so basically what I've tried to do in our time together is talk about 4 major areas in terms of planning for transitions with people who use AAC. Clearly there's an awful lot we could talk about, but the 4 major things I always try and think about when planning for transition: safe, supportive place to live, meaningful activities, needed services, and are we thinking about how to develop friendships and intimate relationships. I've enjoyed sharing some stories with you of, I think, people that represent a lot of different communication styles and ability levels, so I would hope no matter whom you're working with, there's sort of bits and pieces here that would make sense. I'm going to come back to Daniel Gilbert one more time. So again, he sort of looked at what's made people happy across time, and I thought this was interesting. When looking back on their past, people are more likely to regret things they did not try than to regret things they did try and didn't work out as hoped. And I think often we sort of think of people with disabilities and we think of all the challenges. We tend to be very protective, that we're worried that something will happen that won't work out and then they'll feel even worse and all those sorts of things. And I just keep thinking of Michael Williams in that second floor apartment. He needed the chance to try that, to figure out maybe this wasn't the greatest idea and I should be living on the first floor, but he was only going to be happy and he was only going to learn that by having the chance to try that himself. So, as an educator and as a parent, I'm trying to get better at letting people take risks and make their own decisions. If you're interested, a lot of the people that you've seen in these webcasts are also in a book. So we had an opportunity to write a book to try and bring all these things together. And one of the things I'm proud of with the book is a lot of the chapters are co-authored between a clinician and a university-based researcher and a person who uses AAC. And finally, as I mentioned, all of the links and webcasts and movies and all those things that I've talked about, if you go to aac.psu.edu and enter the word transition in the search bar, it'll bring up a page that has links to all of the things I've talked so quickly about today. So that would be a good way to do it. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. When we saw Ben today.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, I just wondered, when you're working with reading skills, are you doing it isolated or have you got the support of the teachers in the school?
And that's a very good question. A lot of the children that are involved in the research project, we actually targeted kids that weren't getting literacy in their school because they were part of a research project, so we needed to be able to say the skills they're showing change in are only changing because of what we're doing. It's not what's happening at school and that sort of thing. So a lot of the kids you see in the videos are ones where it's just been us. However, the practices that we're talking about, we have gotten a lot of feedback from teachers that they have been used successfully. So we've been working, there's both the website that explains the approaches, there's also some commercial products that are available, and the goal is to walk people through how to deliver that type of instruction. So we've got hopefully getting good feedback from both those places. Other questions? I've never ended a presentation on time in my life. So.
I have a question about the last item about the mentors.
Yes.
What kind of evaluations did you get from the participants?
Yeah, no, they were both very positive about it. 97% of the mentors said that they would, loved it, wanted to do it again. 97% of the younger people said they loved it and wanted to do it again. And actually a lot of them continued to communicate after our research was over. So we gave them the email addresses and they continued. The one person in both that didn't like it was, one of the 30 mentors really wanted to be, here's what you should do. And the younger person was the one that was getting the, here's what you should do. So that was the one couple that our dating service didn't help. we couldn't.
Where you didn't succeed in the
right.
mentoring the mentors.
Right. But we're focusing on the 29 that were happy. So that's how we're approaching it.
Fler frågor?
Well, thank you very
Okay.
much. You've got a lot to thank you very much.
We just wondered what developmental level were the children that you were working with?
For the, which ones?
For the reading.
For the reading, we've seen a whole range. I mean, we're often seeing individuals that are starting with 5, the teachers would describe that person as having 5 vocabulary items that they're asking for food and drink, and that's about it. So both for Anna, whom Janice showed yesterday morning, and Bren, there were real questions about whether they would ever get beyond. I mean, at age 13, 5 concepts.
Yeah.
Krista was on object matching. So was what the teachers were doing an accurate description of their cognitive level? No. But if they'd been formally tested, I'm sure they'd have gotten those results from formal testing. What we would argue is for a lot of these kids, you need to dive in and start teaching and see what happens. Because for most of them, it's not that they are incapable of learning, it's that no one's ever tried in a systematic way.
Okay. Thank you so much, David. And